But speaking of money that doesn't go very far, Labour has uncovered the fact that the Tories have written off, wait for this, £4 billion. That's double the 45p tax cut value of was going to be. That was 2 billion. This is 4 billion in botched public spending, which is worth about £146 per household on things like, for example, they binned £8.6 million worth of burgundy passports when it brought the blue ones in. Now, Dan, why didn't they just finish off the burgundy ones first? It's like throwing the whole half a pack of biscuits in the bin because you bought some hobnobs. Just finish the stuff you've got before you move on, surely.
I don't know the inside track of that one, but I suspect it might be something to do with the fact that it was a commercial contract. So they kind of started from a certain date printing the blue ones, and they fixed that date in advance, I think, as well. So maybe there's something here. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is, when you run the country, there is always going to be some money lost down the back of the sofa or lost in the pipework. I think the problem for the government now is A, this is obviously a lot of money, £4 billion, and B, it's a government that is saying it's going to crack down on waste and trim the fat and that kind of thing. So suddenly it becomes a story, it turns from a story of, well, you know, during Rishi Sunak's days, there was and this sort of dates back to then, in fact, there was a lot of money lost in kind of COVID schemes, for example, that were deliberately generous and far-reaching in order to make sure that people didn't fall through the cracks. Because of that, you ended up with problems with COVID loans to businesses, which were open to fraud and that kind of thing, and also people who didn't need money sort of getting money. So that is always going to happen. But now you've got a government that's saying we're going to crack down on waste, and you sort of say, well, you know, what about that? Well, instead of trimming civil service jobs and all that sort of thing, can't you get the most basic stuff, which this seems to be kind of in order?
Yeah, I suspect they would have seen something like 8.5 million as absolute chicken feed, to quote a former prime minister of this parish, and not been too bothered about it. But when all these preferred the political win of saying blue passports, everyone, but when you add up all the little things they thought weren't important, it turns into £4 billion, which is, like you say, it is a lot of money, and it's politically very damaging. When you want to start cutting money off benefits, and you go, well, there's 4 billion. You wasted 4 billion. Why are you taking, you know, £2 off someone who's having to use a food bank when there's 4 billion that you've spaffed up the wall, you idiots?
I seem to remember the £20 a week on universal credit that they gave during COVID. I think the cost of that was about 6 billion for a year. So comparable numbers.
£4 billion is a lot of money. Now, get into the comments, everybody. Ask us your questions. What do you think about the wasting of money? Do you think, as Dan suggested there, that it's a normal part of running a government? Do you think this has just totted up too much? Would you rather have kept the burgundy passports for a bit? Who knows? John says, how will the new boundary changes affect things? I suppose this is talking about the constituency parliamentary boundary changes if there's a new general election, Dan, because there has been talk about how that's going to make things more difficult for Labour to win in some places.
God, first supply side economics and then the Boundary Commission. This is really
well done, John.
It should be a minor element here. Thanks, John. I have to admit, I have to go back and catch up on exactly when the dates for the boundary changes were. I think when I last looked it up, there were the boundary changes were due to come in before the next election in 24. And I think every time they've been proposed, they do slightly favour the Tories, just because of kind of historical things and some seats getting bigger and some getting smaller over time. And the whole point of the boundary review is you're making all the seats equal size. But I would have to check that, because the problem with the boundary review is you have to check every time, because time and time and time again, it's been ditched, kind of either for practical reasons, political reasons, that kind of thing, and has managed not to happen. And we've gone years now since we've had a successful boundary review. I think from the top of my head, it might be the early 2010s, but, you know, don't quote me on that.
There was one, I think, that around the time of the COVID.
Have you been secretly Googling while I've been...
No, I was doing something else entirely. But I can vaguely recall it.
Yeah, so that is the issue. I mean, the thing is, though, with the boundary changes, I'm pretty sure it's always been phrased in terms of, maybe about a dozen seats sort of thing, which when you're talking about the kind of poll swings that we have at the moment, that just leaves the effect of the boundary review in the shade. So I'm not going to say it's not going to have an effect. And if there's a very, very close election, then you could say, oh, well, if we hadn't had the boundary review, it would be different. But generally, I think a lot of people see that the Boundary Commission changes are long overdue. The only argument is about exactly how you do them and whether you use in-date data or out-of-date data. That might leave out some kind of younger voters who, of course, are more likely to vote Labour statistically.
Yeah, and things obviously have demographically changed. A lot of people have left London, for example, in the cities in the last couple of years, moved out to the country, live in a shed there, a bit like Dan. So they may have changed things as well. Now, there are a lot of people in the comments apparently calling for an early general election. I think the only chance you're going to get of that is because we are dependent upon Liz Truss to call that general election. The only chance you're going to get of her actually doing that, really, is if any pollsters come and ask you your opinion over who should run the country. Tell them the Tories and Liz Truss, because if the polls go up, then she'll call a general election. So let's rig the polls, everybody. If you get a chance to speak to a pollster, tell them you want Liz Truss in, and then maybe that will somehow feed into a national movement to trick her into calling a general election, and then we all, we have what we want in the end and a chance to express our opinion. That would be good. So it's worth a try. Anyway, it's a better plan than some other people have got.